Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair, and to the last week of Classic Novel Month. How coincidental that we are looking at my favorite Mark Twain book today. I saved the best for last. So, let's just get to it. Today I'm reviewing The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And I don't have a copy of it either, because my copy of Huck Finn was packaged with the copy of Tom Sawyer that I mentioned last week. So, let's just get to it. The covers again vary, but are usually images of Huck and Jim floating on a raft down the river. So, on to the story proper. The story begins in St. Petersburg, Missouri, on the shore of the Mississippi River. Huckleberry Finn and his friend Tom Sawyer have each come into a considerable sum of money as a result of their earlier adventures in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which we looked at last week. I forgot to explain that these books are basically short stories with an overarching plot to them. Huck explains that he is placed under the guardianship of the widow Douglas, who he had saved the life of in the last book, who together with her strict sister, Miss Watson, not her, although she'd make the book much more exciting, are attempting to civilize him and teach him religion. Finding civilized life confining, his spirits are raised somewhat when Tom Sawyer helps him escape one night past Miss Watson's slave Jim to meet up with Tom's gang of self-proclaimed robbers. Just as the gang's activities begin to bore Huck, he is suddenly interrupted by the reappearance of his shiftless, alcoholic father, Pap, who is also abusive to him. Knowing that Pap would only spend the money on alcohol, Huck is successful in preventing him from acquiring the fortune. However, he still gains custody of Huck and leaves town with him. Sometimes I want to live in the days of lenient custody laws. Not really. Pap forcibly moves Huck to his isolated cabin in the woods. That just sounds like a horror movie plot. Due to Pap's drunken violence and habit of keeping Huck locked inside the cabin, Huck, during one of his father's absences, elaborately fakes his own death, escapes the cabin, and sets off down the river. Well, there's no body. He must be dead. Not like he's faked his own death before. He settles on Jackson's Island in the Mississippi. Here, Huck reunites with Jim, Miss Watson's slave. Jim has also run away after he overheard Miss Watson planning to sell him down the river. Yeah, since the book was written in the late 1800s, I apologize for all the slavery and racially insensitive stuff, but that's how it was written back then, and you can't put today's standards on a book whose author has been dead for over a century. Jim plans to make his way to the town of Cairo in Illinois, a free state, so that he can later buy the rest of his enslaved family's freedom. Which is noble of him, although what I know about American history, it might not have worked out that way for every slave that tried that. At first, Huck is conflicted about the sin and crime of supporting a runaway slave. But as the two talk in depth and bond over their mutually held superstitions, Huck emotionally connects with Jim, who increasingly becomes Huck's close friend and guardian. They both hate the confines of their lives, Huck's confinement of becoming civilized and Jim's forced servitude. After heavy flooding on the river, the two find a raft, which they borrow, as well as an entire house floating on the river. Entering the house to seek loot, Jim finds the naked body of a dead man lying on the floor, shot in the back. He prevents Huck from seeing the corpse, which I don't blame him for. If there was a dead body, what teenager would want to see it? What teenager that isn't Will Wheaton, River Phoenix, Jerry O'Connell, or Corey Feldman? To find out the latest news in town, Huck dresses as a girl, like Ash and Cloud before him. Wait, after him, and enters the house of Judith Loftus, a woman new to the area, thinking she will not recognize him as a boy. Huck learns from her about the news of his own supposed murder. Pat was initially blamed, but since Jim ran away, he's also a suspect. That always annoyed me. They blamed Jim despite the fact that Pat was an alcoholic, and despite that he could deny it, I doubt he can remember half of the shit he does when he's drunk. But I digress. A reward for Jim's capture has initiated a manhunt for him. Mrs. Loftus becomes increasingly suspicious of Huck being a boy, finally proving it through a series of tests, such as noticing how well he throws and catches various items, and how terrible he is at sewing. Because only girls can sew, and only boys can throw and catch stuff. Gotta love those mid-1800s stereotypical gender roles. Once he is exposed, she nevertheless allows him to leave her home without commotion, not realizing that he is the allegedly murdered boy they've just been discussing. Huck returns to Jim to tell him the news and that a party is coming to Jackson's Island that very night, so the two hastily load up the raft and initiate Red Dwarf Plan Alpha. Run like hell. After a while, Huck and Jim come across a grounded steamship. Searching it, they stumble upon two thieves discussing murdering a third, but they flee before being noticed. They are later separated by a mist. Not the mist from Silent Hill, though, making Jim intensely anxious. And when they reunite, Huck tricks Jim into thinking he dreamed the entire incident. Jim is not deceived for long, and is deeply hurt that his friend has teased him so mercilessly. Huck becomes remorseful and apologizes to him. Traveling onward, Huck and Jim's raft is struck by a passing steamship, separating the two. Huck is given shelter on the Kentucky side of the river by the Grangerfords, an aristocratic family. He befriends Buck Grangerford, a boy about his age, and learns that the Grangerfords are engaged in a 30-year blood feud against another family, the Shepherdsons. Turns out this is what happened when the Montagues and the Capulets were reincarnated. The Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons go to the same church and act peaceably inside, though both families bring guns. Because this is America! The vendetta finally comes to a head when Buck's older sister elopes with a member of the Shepherdson clan, like in Romeo and Juliet. In the resulting conflict, the Grangerford males from this branch of the family are shot and killed. Huck is particularly devastated by the brutality of Buck's murder, which he witnesses but declines to describe, and for that, I thank him. He is immensely relieved to be reunited with Jim, who has recovered and repaired the raft. Near the Arkansas-Missouri-Tennessee border, Jim and Huck take two on-the-run grifters aboard the raft. The younger man, who is about 30, introduces himself as the long-lost son of an English duke. The older one, who is about 70, then trumps this outrageous claim by alleging that he himself is the lost Dauphin, the son of Louis XVI and the rightful king of France. The Duke and King then become permanent passengers on Jim and Huck's raft, committing a series of scams worthy of the cul-de-sac upon unsuspecting locals along the way. To allow for Jim's presence, they first print fake bills for an escaped slave that will divert suspicions, but later paint him up entirely blue and call him the sick Arab, so he can move about the raft without being tied up and in public view. I have no words for this part. On one occasion, the swindlers advertise a 3-night engagement of a play called The Royal Nonsuch. But the play turns out to be only a couple of minutes worth of an absurd bawdy sham. I know I was joking before, but this really sounds like an episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy. On the afternoon of the first performance, a drunk called Boggs is shot dead by a gentleman named Colonel Sherburne. A lynch mob forms to retaliate against Sherburne, and Sherburne, surrounded at the home, disperses the mob by making a defiant speech describing how true lynching should be done. By the third night of the Royal Nonsuch, the townspeople prepare for their revenge on the Duke and the King for their money-making scam, but the two cleverly skip town with Huck and Jim right before the performance begins, which is basically an episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy, except there are no consequences in this situation, and Ed, Edd and Eddy usually didn't have lynch mobs and murders. In the next town, the two swindlers then impersonate two brothers of Peter Wilkes, a recently deceased man of property. To match accounts of Wilkes' brothers, the King attempts an English accent, and the Duke pretends to be a deaf mute, while starting to collect Wilkes' inheritance. Huck decides that the Wilkes' 3 orphan nieces, who treat Huck with kindness, don't deserve to be cheated. Thus, he tries to retrieve their stolen inheritance. And like Tom Sawyer, he's a jerk with a heart of gold. In a desperate moment, Huck is forced to hide the money in Wilkes' coffin, which is buried the next morning. The arrival of two new men, who seem to be the real brothers, throws everything into confusion, so that the townspeople decide to dig up the coffin in order to determine who are the true brothers. But with everyone else distracted, Huck leaves for the raft, hoping to never see the Duke and the King again. However, the two villains return to Huck's despair. When Huck is finally able to get away a second time to return to his raft to flee with Jim, he finds to his horror that the swindlers have sold Jim to a family that intends to return him to his proper owner for the reward. Huck resolves to free Jim once and for all. Huck learns that Jim is being held at the plantation of Silas and Sally Phelps. The family's nephew Tom is expected for a visit at the same time of Huck's arrival, so Huck is luckily mistaken for Tom and welcomed into their home. He plays along, hoping to find Jim's location and free him. In a surprising plot twist, it's revealed that the expected nephew is in fact Tom Sawyer.
What a twist!
Man, it was really easy to commit identity theft back then. All you have to do is say I'm this person and apparently people will believe it. I know pictures weren't that common, but I mean, there wasn't at least like a drawing. I'm pretty sure that Huck and Tom don't look anything alike. Whatever. When Huck intercepts the real Tom Sawyer on the road and tells him everything, Tom decides he wants to join the scheme, pretending to be his own younger half-brother Sid, while Huck continues to pretend to be Tom. And wacky hijinks ensue. In the meantime, Jim has told the family about the two grifters and the new plan for the royal nunsucks, and so the townspeople capture the Duke and the King, who are then tarred in feathers and run out of town on a rail. Finally, some consequences in this book. Rather than simply sneaking Jim out of the shed where he's held, Tom developed an elaborate plan involving secret messages, a hidden tunnel, a rope ladder sent to Jim in his food, and other elements from adventure books he's read, including an anonymous note to the Phelpses warning them of the whole scheme. But then Crichton just suggests to use the matter paddle and they haul ass. Just kidding. During the ultimate resulting pursuit, Tom is shot in the leg and Jim remains by his side, risking recapture rather than completing his escape alone. Although a local doctor admires his decency, he has Jim arrested in his sleep and returned to the Phelpses, because being a good person apparently is enough to be free. Soon, Tom's Aunt Polly arrives and reveals Huck and Tom's true identities to the Phelpses. Jim is revealed to be a free man. Miss Watson died 2 months ago and freed Jim in her will, but Tom chose not to reveal that tidbit of information so he could come up with that complicated rescue plan. Because it's better to risk life and limb and possibly Jim's death rather than just telling them that he was free. Remember how I said last week that Tom was a decent character, but he was a jerk sometimes? This is Jerk Tom. Jim tells Huck that Huck's father's been dead for some time. But how does Jim know that? Well, Pap was the dead man they found in the floating house, and so Huck can safely return to St. Petersburg. Huck declares that he is quite glad to be done writing a story, and despite Sally's plans to adopt and civilize him, he intends to flee west to Indian territory, because it works so damn well the first 2 times. That, my friends, was Huckleberry Finn, and the last review of Classic Novel Month. Next month we go back to a normal variety of books, although next week is gonna be killer.
The river keeps on churning, and the world just keeps on burning, and I find myself yearning for the freedom. Come on! You don't know about me without you have read a book by Mr. Mark Twain, and the man ain't a crook. But a crook's life has always sort of sounded right to me. So I joined up with Tom Sawyer's gang, now I love some robbery. I preferred my nature up close and not through a window. But Tom said live respectable like up there with the widow. So I did, yes sirree, and they learned me to read and write. I knew my math facts cold, man, yeah I had them mesmerized. Yes, I knew the timetable's cold, like 6 times 7 is 35. My life wasn't half bad, you know, it was pretty nice. But all of a sudden my pap showed up, he'd heard I'd struck it rich. And my dad's a drunken bum, you know, he's a real son of a gun.
You watch your tongue, you think you're smarter than your old man?
He locked me in a habit, I felt like I might just turn to dust. All he did was beat me up while he drank and he cussed. He cussed the government, and that was just the beginning. He cussed the folk he knew so well and all the folk he didn't. Now imagine your own dear old dad all drunk and shaved, chasing you around the cabin because he thinks you might be safe. Well, that went on just a little too long. I was ready to escape, so I hedged my bets and faked my death and floated away. On the river keeps on churning, and the world just keeps on burning, and I find myself yearning for the
Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair, and to the last week of Classic Novel Month. How coincidental that we're looking at my favorite Mark Twain book today. I did save the best for last, and I don't have a copy of it because the copy of Tom Sawyer I had was packaged in with a copy of Huckleberry Finn, so I don't have that copy either. So, let's just get to it. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I didn't like that. Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair, and to the final week of Classic Novel Month. How coincidental that Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair, and to the last week of Classic Novel Month.